One snowy night, in the frozen woods of Vermont, an old retired K9 stopped in his tracks and growled into the wind. His ears twitched, his nose lifted, and he ran. What he found wasn't a criminal, it wasn't a threat, it was an 8-year-old girl, barely breathing, curled in the snow with a shivering kitten pressed to her chest. She whispered just 3 words. "I'm sorry. Mom." What followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a quiet miracle, because behind every whisper, sometimes, God is listening, and sometimes He sends a dog. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Pine Hollow, Vermont, late January. The town of Pine Hollow crouched quietly between snow-drowned hills, tucked against the edge of the northern Green Mountains. Winters here came hard, unapologetic, and long. Roads vanished for days. Branches cracked like brittle bones under the weight of ice. And the wind. It didn't howl. It hissed, like a secret no one wanted to hear. Tonight, a blizzard rolled down from the ridges, swallowing fences, porches, and even silence itself. The few lamps that still glowed flickered like tired sentinels. Most of Pine Hollow was asleep, unaware that just beyond the tree line, something small and fragile was slowly fading beneath the snow. In a 1-story cabin at the forest's edge, Lucas Grant stared out the frosted window. He was 39, tall and lean, with the kind of posture that stuck even after war. His dark hair was overgrown and flecked with premature gray, and his beard shadowed a face lined by fatigue rather than time. His left ear bore a pale scar, a sharp reminder of the blast that ended his final rescue tour in Syria. Lucas didn't speak much anymore, not since returning. Solitude suited him like a threadbare coat. Not pretty, but familiar. Scout. The German shepherd sprawled near the hearth, stirred. He was old now, 10, maybe 11, with a thick coat of sable and black, and eyes that still held the sharpness of duty. His right leg stiffened in the cold, a relic of an IED blast in Kandahar, but he never made a sound about it. Loyalty like that didn't ask for pity. It simply endured. Lucas shifted, tossing another log on the fire. Wind howled through the eaves, shaking the old wooden walls. He moved toward the back door out of habit, glancing at the snow stacking higher outside. His breath fogged the glass. Scout sat up straight, then he moved fast. No bark, no growl, just instinct, pure and immediate. He bolted from the rug and pressed against the door, nose twitching, body tense. Lucas's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Boy Scout whined once, pacing tight circles near the threshold. Lucas grabbed his coat, a flashlight, and the heavy boots by the door. He threw on his gloves, yanked the handle, and the storm slapped him full in the face. Snow flew sideways. The porch steps were gone. The trail had vanished, and Scout was already off, plunging into the wall of white. Damn it! Scout Lucas cursed under his breath and followed. The cold wrapped around him like wet cloth, biting into his cheeks and neck. He could barely see the dog's tracks, but he trusted them. Scout didn't run unless it mattered. The forest loomed ahead, all shadows and snow-laden limbs. Pine needles rattled. Branches sagged low under snow like grieving arms. Lucas's flashlight barely carved through the whiteout. His boots sank deep with each step, legs burning as he pressed on. Minutes passed, or longer. Then Scout stopped. Lucas came up beside him, panting hard. What? He didn't finish, because he saw it. A shape beneath the tree, small, still, snow blurred and barely noticeable, like the forest was trying to erase it. Lucas dropped to his knees. It was a child. A girl, maybe 8 years old, curled into herself at the base of a pine, half covered in snow. Her coat was too thin, her boots were soaked through, her arms were wrapped protectively around something soft and black and white. A cat, a kitten, really, no more than 6 months old, shivering violently, barely alive, tucked under the girl's chin as if it was the only thing she had left to protect. Lucas's heart hammered. He pulled off his gloves and reached gently toward the girl's face. Her cheeks were ghostly pale. Ice clung to her lashes. Her lips were blue, parted just slightly. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, and then she went still. Lucas moved fast, but gently. The girl weighed almost nothing in his arms, her body limp as he pushed through the swirling snow toward the cabin. Scout ran ahead, his pace steady despite the cold gnawing at his joints. The kitten clung unconsciously to the girl's chest, its breath shallow, paws twitching weakly, inside. The fire still crackled low. Lucas kicked the door shut behind him and knelt on the worn rug, laying the girl down near the heat. He peeled away her wet coat and boots, careful not to jar her small frame. Her skin was frighteningly cold to the touch. He wrapped her in every dry blanket he could find, old quilts, a flannel sheet, even his parka. The kitten he placed in a basket near the hearth, layered with towels and an old sweater. It gave the faintest mewl, barely more than a breath. He moved on instinct. Years of emergency training took over. And for once, the silence in his mind quieted too. No flashbacks, no noise, just action. "Scout," he said, voice low. The dog came closer, lying near the girl but not too close, his amber eyes alert. Lucas placed a warm kettle by the fire and rubbed the girl's hands between his own, then fetched 2 hot water bottles and slid them under the blankets at her sides. She stirred, barely. Lucas leaned in. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're warm now. Just breathe, kid." Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "Whiskers," she mumbled. Her eyes fluttered open a sliver. Glancing toward the hearth, "The cat?" Lucas asked. A small nod. He followed her gaze. The kitten, black and white with a pink nose and one ear slightly bent, lay curled in the towel bundle, still breathing but not well. Lucas crouched by the fire, his breath misting above the coals. He watched both of them for a long while before finally exhaling. Then he saw it, the faint bruise ringed around her left wrist, a small handcuff-shaped shadow, old enough to have faded slightly, but dark enough to still whisper of violence. The girl slept on, her tiny form cocooned in warmth. Her face turned to the flames. In the quiet, Lucas noticed something peeking from under her coat, half stuffed into the inner pocket, a small, dog-eared notebook. He hesitated, then pulled it out gently. The cover was faded pink with the name Emily Rose written in uneven pencil letters. Inside were drawings, stick figures at first, then more detailed images, a house with no windows, a girl with tangled hair curled into a ball under a table, a man with a square jaw and angry eyes, yelling over a spilled cup. Lucas swallowed hard. So, Emily, and someone had been hurting her. He flipped to the back. A final page had only a short sentence scrawled in crooked lines. "Mom said, if it gets too bad, find the man in the woods." He closed the notebook slowly. Scout shifted beside him, his eyes never leaving the girl. "Guess that's me," Lucas muttered, as dawn crept in, gray and silent. The cabin warmed inch by inch. Emily stirred, her eyes finally opening fully. She looked around, her expression unreadable. Lucas crouched down beside her. "Hey, I'm Lucas," he said gently. "You're safe. This is my dog, Scout. That's your cat, right, the one you called Whiskers." She blinked at him, then at Scout, then at the hearth. Her voice came out cracked and barely there. "Is he okay?" Lucas nodded. "He's hanging in there. You both are." Emily didn't smile. She didn't cry either. She just reached for the edge of the blanket and clutched it tight. Lucas noticed the bruise again when her sleeve slid back. "You hungry?" She shook her head. He didn't press. Instead, he brought over a mug of warm milk and left it on the floor beside her. She stared at it for a long time, then finally reached out with 2 trembling hands and took a sip. Lucas waited until her breathing steadied. "Emily Rose," he said, lifting the notebook slightly. "That your full name?" She nodded once. "Want to tell me what happened?" Her voice was flat. "He got mad again, said I let Whiskers in the house. He threw the litter box at me." Lucas clenched his jaw. "Who's he?" Emily didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened around the mug. "Wade, my mom's friend since she died. He says I'm too much trouble." Lucas's heart sank. "How long ago?" 4 months. Lucas stood and walked to the kitchen, gripping the counter with white knuckles. He wanted to put a fist through something. Instead, he reached for the phone on the wall. No signal. The landline was dead, probably buried under 3 feet of snow. He'd have to wait to call it in. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Not loud, a calm, measured knock. Lucas opened the door to find Joanna Hayes standing on the porch, bundled in a long green wool coat, her snow boots dusted with frost. She was in her early 40s, tall and willow-thin, with coppery hair pulled back into a low braid and skin pale from years in cold mountain air. Her eyes, soft gray, had the weight of grief tucked into their corners. Her late husband had died 5 winters ago in a backcountry avalanche. Since then, Joanna had poured herself into her work as a local veterinarian, never quite letting anyone back in. She carried a canvas tote with a red cross stitched on the side. "Thought I'd check on you," she said. "Storm was brutal last night." Lucas stepped aside, not saying much. Joanna's gaze moved instantly to the hearth, then to Emily, who sat upright on the rug, blanket around her shoulders. She wandered into the woods. Lucas explained. Had a kitten with her, both nearly frozen. Joanna moved quietly, kneeling by the kitten. "Mind if I take a look?" Lucas nodded. "Name's Whiskers." Joanna smiled faintly. "Of course it is." Her touch was gentle but practiced. She murmured soft words under her breath as she examined the cat. Ears, paws, heart rate. After a few minutes, she looked up. "He's weak, but he'll make it. Needs fluids, maybe a few days of warmth." She turned toward Emily. "Is it all right if I check your arm?" Emily flinched. Joanna didn't move. "You don't have to. I just want to help." Emily stared for a moment, then slowly lifted her sleeve. Joanna's eyes darkened at the sight of the bruises. She reached out, pressing carefully. "Nothing's broken, but that's not an accident." Lucas spoke softly. "Her mother passed. She's been living with a man named Wade Carlson." Joanna stood slowly. "I know that name." She looked at Lucas, then at the girl, then at the fire. "I'll be back in an hour. I have a small IV kit for Whiskers. And," her voice dropped lower, "I know someone at Child Protective Services in Montpelier. She owes me a favor." Lucas nodded once. Joanna left without another word. Back inside, Emily was watching him, eyes unreadable. Lucas crouched again. "I don't know what you've been through, but no one's going to hurt you here." She didn't answer, but when Scout lay beside her, placing his head gently on her lap, she ran her fingers through his fur without thinking. The gesture was small, quiet, but it was something. The morning after the storm had a deceptive stillness to it. Sunlight filtered softly through the frost-laced window panes of the cabin, casting long golden stripes across the floorboards. The fire had burned down to coals, but the heat still held. Emily lay curled up on the couch, her arms wrapped protectively around Scout, who had dozed off beside her with his chin resting on her knees. Whiskers, slightly more energetic now, stretched on the windowsill, his little black and white frame warmed by the sun. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in front of him, eyes locked on the notebook again. There were more drawings now that he hadn't noticed before, pages torn from a child's mind like leaves in a storm. One sketch showed a room without windows, a mattress on the floor, and a door with what looked like a padlock. Another had Emily sitting on the floor, clutching Whiskers, while an adult figure, tall, square-shouldered, fists clenched, stood in shadow. Lucas turned the page slowly, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just neglect. This was cruelty, a different kind of damage, one that didn't always show up on skin but settled deep in the bones. Outside, tires crunched over hard-packed snow. He stood quickly, Scout's ears perked, his body snapping into alert posture. Emily stirred but didn't speak. Lucas opened the door to find Joanna Hayes back again, this time without a coat. Her breath puffed visibly in the cold, cheeks flushed from the walk up the hill. She held a plastic container in one hand, a canvas pouch over her shoulder, and a worn manila envelope tucked under one arm. "Brought some stew and fluids for Whiskers," she said. "Stepping inside, hope you don't mind the smell of rosemary." Lucas offered a nod of thanks. Joanna moved past him, setting the stew on the counter and kneeling by the kitten again. Emily sat up and watched her silently. Joanna gave her a small smile. "He's doing better. That's thanks to you. You know, you kept him alive." Emily looked down, mumbling something almost inaudible. Joanna tilted her head. "What was that?" "Sweetheart, I tried to keep him quiet. Wade doesn't like animals." There it was again, that name. Wade. Joanna glanced up at Lucas, her expression tightening. She pulled the envelope from under her arm and handed it to him. "I made a few calls last night," she said. "Wade Carlson has a sealed incident report from 4 years ago. Domestic violence. The charges were dropped, no conviction. But there's more." Lucas scanned the paper quickly. A neighbor had reported loud fights, suspected physical abuse toward a different woman. The details were thin, scrubbed, most likely, but enough remained to set off alarm bells. "I spoke to a friend at Child Services," Joanna added. "She can open a preliminary case file. You just need to submit something, anything, to get it rolling." Lucas gave her a long look. "Can she be trusted?" "Her name's Marie Alden. We went to vet school together. She's got a spine like steel and a temper to match. You send her a report, she'll push it through." Lucas nodded. "Then I'll write it tonight." At that moment, Emily spoke again. "Do you know what the cold room is?" Joanna turned toward her. Gently, "No." "Honey." "What is it?" Emily's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was describing something as ordinary as brushing her teeth. "It's in the basement. There's no heat, no lights. The door has a chain. He puts me there when I'm loud, or when I feed Whiskers, or if I forget to clean the sink." Silence filled the room like smoke. Joanna crouched beside her. "Emily." "How long would he leave you there?" Sometimes all night, sometimes 2. Lucas leaned against the wall, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Joanna stood, her voice quiet but firm. That's enough. That's more than enough. Scout moved beside Emily again, laying down and resting his head against her hip. She stroked the top of his head gently. Whiskers mewed from his perch and leapt to the couch, curling beside her. It was the first time Emily smiled. Just a little, but it was real. Joanna turned back to Lucas. You write that report, I'll drive it to Montpellier myself by early afternoon. Lucas had typed the letter using his old laptop. It was short, direct, and heavy with truth. He attached scanned images of Emily's drawings and added his own written statement detailing her condition upon arrival. He signed it, saved a copy, and handed the flash drive to Joanna. She's not going back there, he said. Joanna gave him a firm nod and slipped the drive into her coat. I'll be back tomorrow. When she left, the quiet settled again. Emily sat on the floor, brushing Scout's fur. Whiskers watched her with a sleepy gaze, his tail twitching in small arcs. Lucas knelt beside her. You're brave. You know that she didn't answer, but her eyes softened. Later that evening, as the sky turned amber behind the trees, headlights appeared at the base of the road. A truck. Lucas stepped onto the porch, heart hammering. The man who stepped out was tall, broad, and wore a navy flannel jacket buttoned tight against the cold. His hair was cut short, thinning at the crown, and his jaw was clenched with the practiced calm of someone used to getting his way. Wade Carlson. Lucas didn't wait for him to speak. She's not here for you. Wade's voice was low, forced through gritted teeth. She's my responsibility. Lucas took a step forward. You lost that right the second you locked her in a basement. Scout stood beside Lucas, growling low in his throat. Wade noticed. I'll call the sheriff. Lucas's eyes narrowed. Do it, and I'll show them the report, the photos. And that basement. Wade looked at him long and hard, but he wasn't used to resistance. Not like this, after a beat. He turned back to his truck and slammed the door. Lucas watched until the lights disappeared down the hill. Inside, Emily stood in the doorway, watching. You okay? Lucas asked. She looked past him, toward the road, then back at Scout, then at him. I think so. The wind howled through the branches outside the cabin, rattling the eaves like a warning. The sky had dulled into a heavy gray, the kind that pressed against the world like a held breath. Inside, the fire was burning high, casting flickering light across Emily's small frame as she sat curled on the couch. Whiskers lay in her lap, tucked tightly beneath her arms. Scout sat nearby, still as stone, eyes fixed on the door. Lucas stood by the front window, shoulders tense. He'd seen the truck before it even reached the ridge, navy blue, rust eating at the rear fender. It crunched up the icy path, uninvited and unwelcome. Stay here, Lucas said quietly to Emily. She didn't answer, but she pulled Whiskers closer, her fingers clutching the cat's fur like a lifeline. The truck door opened. Wade Carlson stepped out. He wore a clean flannel coat, stiff jeans, and leather gloves that creaked as he moved. His face was flushed with cold, but his eyes were sharp, practiced in their calm. He had the look of a man used to winning arguments by never raising his voice, just letting the fear settle in others instead. Lucas stepped out onto the porch, the cold biting through his flannel shirt. I'm here for Emily, Wade said flatly. Let's not make this hard. She's not going anywhere with you. Lucas replied, She's my responsibility. I've raised her since her mother passed, And you have no legal claim. She's terrified of you. That's because she lies. Always has, manipulative little. Scout growled, a deep, guttural sound, the kind that came from the chest, not the throat. He moved between Lucas and Wade, shoulders squared, teeth slightly bared, his fur bristled down his spine. Wade's eyes flicked to the dog, then to the window behind Lucas, where Emily was watching, wide-eyed, whiskers still clutched in her arms. She didn't speak, but she was shaking. "She's coming with me," Wade said, stepping forward. That's when Joanna's voice rang out behind them. "I wouldn't do that." Joanna Hayes walked up the path with sure steps, her long parka trailing snow. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, but her voice was unwavering. Right behind her came a second figure, Diane Carter, from the Vermont Department of Children and Families, mid-40s, tall, poised, with dark skin and short curls tucked under a wool cap. Her eyes were observant. Unreadable? Diane stepped ahead, holding up her badge. "Mr. Carlson, I'm Diane Carter. We've reviewed statements and visual evidence. I'm here on behalf of the state, and I'm informing you that Emily Rose is not to leave this property with you." Wade scoffed. Based on what scribbles in a notebook, Joanna moved forward, holding up a sealed folder. Drawings that match trauma symptoms. Medical notes on her bruises. A sworn report from Dr. Lowell, the pediatrician who reviewed her condition. And a signed statement from Mrs. Kessler, your neighbor, confirming they heard screaming and saw Emily left outside in winter. Wade's expression twisted. "That woman's been trying to ruin me since I moved in." "She doesn't have to," Diane said, her tone sharp. "You're doing it yourself." He stepped forward, fists clenched. That's when Scout growled louder and moved. He placed himself fully between Wade and the front door. Hackles raised, tail low, eyes locked on Wade with a predator's warning. Not barking, not lunging, just waiting for an excuse. Inside. Emily cried out softly, "Don't let him in. Please, please don't let him take me." Lucas turned. "He won't." Diane looked at Joanna and gave a small nod. Joanna took a deep breath. Her voice softened, cracking slightly. "You want to know why I came out here?" Wade, why I care so much, Wade didn't answer. Joanna's gaze drifted to the window, to the girl inside, because 10 years ago, I had a daughter named Lila. She was 6. She loved cats. She used to fall asleep holding our beagle like a stuffed animal. She paused, swallowing hard. We lost her in a sledding accident, a patch of ice, a bad turn, too fast. 1 second I was waving from the bottom of the hill, the next, she was gone. Emily was still now, listening. So when I met Emily, Joanna continued, her voice trembling, and saw the way she flinched at every sound, the way she apologized for breathing. I knew what I was looking at. Not a liar, a child who learned to survive by going quiet. There was a long silence. Diane stepped forward, her voice low and firm. "Mr. Carlson, you are officially being detained for investigation of child endangerment and emotional abuse. Officers are en route to escort you to Montpelier for questioning." Wade tried to speak, but no words came. His fists tightened, then slowly unclenched. He turned away, walked to his truck, and sat behind the wheel. Scout remained on alert until the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the clearing 10 minutes later, and officers escorted Wade into custody without resistance. Back inside, Emily still sat on the couch, her arms wrapped around Whiskers. Lucas knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't flinch either. Joanna knelt in front of her. "You're not going back there, Emily. We've made sure of it." "Where will I go?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Diane stepped forward. For now. The state is placing you in Lucas's temporary care until the court hears your case, and we'll do everything we can to make that permanent if you want it. Emily looked at Lucas, then Joanna, then back to Whiskers. She nodded once. I want to stay. 3 weeks passed, soft as the melt of late winter. The snow in Pine Hollow no longer fell in sheets, but in half-hearted flurries that vanished by midday. The sharp wind had given way to gentle breezes, and patches of damp earth began to show through the once frozen ground. Birds had returned, hesitant at first, then louder each morning, reclaiming the silence. In Lucas's cabin, warmth no longer came just from the fire. It lived in the sound of Emily's footsteps on the stairs, the quiet hum of her voice when she read aloud to Whiskers, and the shuffle of Scout's tail across the floor as he followed her from room to room. The change was not dramatic, it was subtle, steady, like watching a tree bud leaf by leaf. Scout, now noticeably slower, no longer sprang up at the creak of every door, but would raise his head with mild curiosity. His coat had dulled. His hind legs sometimes gave out on slick floors. But he remained devoted, especially to Emily. Whiskers had grown too, sleek and playful again, often batting at the edge of Emily's journal while she wrote near the hearth. On the morning of the hearing, the three of them sat quietly in the front seat of Lucas's truck. Emily wore a simple navy dress with a white collar, a hand-me-down from Joanna's late daughter Lila. It fit her loosely, but she didn't complain. Her chestnut hair had been brushed into a neat braid, and a small silver clip pinned it behind one ear, in her arms. She held a stuffed fox named Patch, one of the few toys she'd chosen to keep from her old home. Lucas, dressed in a clean gray shirt and pressed jeans, gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. He wasn't nervous about the outcome. He had faith in the case, the evidence, the DNA test. But something about courtrooms still made his pulse drum like distant thunder. Scout rested in the back seat, his head between his paws, watching the road through drooping eyes. The courthouse in Montpelier was modest, its brick facade softened by ivy and time. Inside, the warmth was dry and stale, radiators clicking with tired effort. The courtroom itself was quiet, lined with wooden benches and high windows streaked with condensation. They were met at the doors by Judge Marion Bellamy, a woman in her early 60s with white hair pinned into a low chignon and a pair of reading glasses that hung from a silver chain around her neck. Her posture was straight, her voice unhurried, and her presence calm without being cold. To her right stood Marie Alden, the caseworker Diane had called in, short, sturdy, with freckles across her cheeks and a clipboard always in hand. She'd been firm in her visits, but kind. Emily liked her, though she rarely said more than a few words during the meetings. Lucas placed a hand on Emily's back as they entered. She didn't speak, but she didn't shake either. When they sat down at the front of the court, she leaned slightly into his arm. The proceedings began with formality, records confirmed, documents entered, DNA results read aloud. The judge paused at the photo submitted with the application. Emily on the porch of Lucas's cabin, smiling gently with Scout at her side, one hand on Whiskers' head. "We've reviewed all written testimony," Judge Bellamy said, her tone warm but authoritative. "The child has been in Mr. Grant's care for 23 days. Medical reports confirm improvement in health. Emotional well-being has been observed. Mr. Grant, do you wish to speak before we continue?" Lucas stood slowly. "Your Honor, I never expected to become a guardian. I moved to Pine Hollow to disappear, but then Scout found Emily, and I realized she wasn't the one who needed saving. If you let her stay, I promise she'll never go back to fear. Not under my roof." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Grant." She turned to Emily. "Miss Emily, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you like to say anything?" Emily looked up from her stuffed fox. Her braid trembled as she stood, tiny in front of the high-backed bench. "I just want to stay where I don't have to be afraid," she said. "That was all." Judge Bellamy folded her hands. Based on the evidence, the corroborated testimony, and the child's expressed desire, the court recognizes the petition for legal guardianship. The name Emily Rose Carlson shall be legally changed to Emily Rose Grant. The gavel struck once. Soft, but final. The courtroom remained still. Lucas exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. Later that afternoon, back in Pine Hollow, Emily stepped into the room that had been prepared just for her. The walls were painted a soft robin's egg blue, a color she'd chosen herself. A bookshelf lined one side of the room, half empty, waiting for stories. The window faced east, and for the first time in her life, her bed sat beside sunlight. She carried a small wooden plaque in her hand. On it, written in green paint, were 4 hand-lettered words. "This room is home." She knelt beside the window and taped the plaque to the inside sill. Scout lay curled near the foot of her bed. Whiskers was already nestled into the comforter, purring softly. Emily smiled and whispered, "We're home, sometimes. Miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come as a whisper in the snow, a child's quiet plea, a dog that still remembers duty, or a stranger who opens the door just in time. In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, God still works through the hearts of ordinary people, through the kindness of a neighbor, the loyalty of an old dog, or the courage of a child who dares to ask for love." Emily's story reminds us that family isn't always bound by blood. It's built by faith, by protection, and by the brave act of standing in the gap when no one else will. In the quiet corners of our lives, God plants seeds of redemption, and sometimes He sends help in fur and 4 paws. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Leave a comment below with the name of someone or some animal who changed your life, and if you believe that no child should ever live in fear again, type Amen in the comments as a prayer for every Emily still waiting to be found. Subscribe to our channel to never miss another story of hope and healing. May God bless you, protect you, and remind you that even in the darkest winters, His light is never far.